Hi, I'm Leah. My dad sold the 160-year-old house my grandma left me. To cover his new wife's debt, he told me it was just business, said grandma never put it in writing, except she did. Then he called the police on me, kicked me off the porch I grew up on, and told the neighbors I was just the help. Now I'm sitting here, alone in a house that used to be mine, wondering how a daughter becomes a stranger in her own family. What makes someone rewrite history? And think I wouldn't fight back? The sun was still up when I pulled into the driveway, though it had started that slow, syrupy descent that painted the edges of the old oak trees golden. From the curb, the house looked the same, at least at first glance. The white trim still framed the deep blue shutters, and the porch swing creaked with the weight of the evening breeze. But I noticed the difference as soon as I stepped out of the car. The sound.
There was music coming from the backyard, something upbeat, tinny, the kind of playlist a teenager might throw together for a backyard barbecue. That wasn't unusual in most neighborhoods, I guess. But in my grandmother's house, it was jarring. I stood there for a moment, keys in my hand, staring at the back of the house as laughter echoed through the trees. I hadn't been told about a party. No one had called. No one had texted. The only voice that had spoken to me lately belonged to my father, and even that had become increasingly rare since his new wife moved in. Zoraida. I made my way around the side gate, brushing past the hydrangeas that used to be my grandmother's pride. Half of them looked half dead now, either overwatered or forgotten. That's when I saw the guests. Strangers. The backyard had been transformed into a social mixer. Tables with white cloths, wine glasses clinking, plates stacked with catered food. I recognized none of the faces. Zoraida floated in the center like a well-trained hostess, laughing just a beat too loud, her hand on the forearm of a man I assumed was one of her cousins. She wore a white linen dress and hoop earrings the size of bracelets. Orville, my father, stood near the grill with a beer in hand, chuckling at something a younger man had said. He looked relaxed, at peace. I hovered for a second on the edge of the grass, unsure if I should step in or just turn back, but then Zoraida caught sight of me. "Oh, Leah," she said, loud enough to draw a few heads. "Didn't know you were stopping by today." Didn't know? This was still my home. At least, it had been. I gave a slight nod and stepped onto the patio. My father looked at me then, for half a second, then turned back to his conversation. Zoraida returned to her hosting duties like I'd been nothing more than a ghost who passed through the frame of a photo. She introduced the woman next to her as her sister from Tampa, then a man from her book club. Each person greeted her with affection and familiarity. No one asked who I was. She never said, not once. I moved through the patio into the house. The air inside was cooler, both in temperature and tone. The smell of lemon oil and old wood hit me, familiar and soft. I walked into the living room expecting to see the portrait of Grandma Eulalia hanging over the mantel. Gone. I blinked, stepping forward as if getting closer would change what I saw. In its place was a modern, abstract canvas, something with blocks of muted green and gold, the kind you'd pick up at a chain store. The wall had been painted pale gray, like the inside of a doctor's office. The floral chair my grandmother had always used sat nowhere in sight. A new leather recliner had taken its place. My chest tightened. I found Zoraida again in the kitchen. "When did the living room get redone?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She didn't look up from the tray she was arranging. "Oh, last week. Thought the place could use a refresh." I stared at her. "She would have understood," she added, finally glancing at me. "It's just paint and furniture, Leah." But it wasn't. It was everything. That night, I stayed in the kitchen after the guests had settled in the backyard again. The noise drifted in, laughing, glasses clinking, someone yelling over a joke I couldn't hear. I sat at the old kitchen table, the one with the scratch on the left corner from when I spilled cranberry juice during a Thanksgiving years ago. I rested my palms against its surface, staring at the wood grain, willing myself not to cry. This was the room where Grandma used to make tea at 3 p.m. Sharp, where we'd sit and go over grocery lists, talk about her garden, where she'd rest her thin hand over mine and whisper, "This house will always be yours, baby girl." But tonight,
It didn't feel like mine. It didn't even feel like hers. I looked out through the window over the sink. Dad was standing with his arm around Zoraida, both laughing like they were at a comedy show. He hadn't said a word to me. Not one, not even when I walked past him. Maybe he didn't know what to say. Maybe he didn't want to start something. Or maybe he just didn't care. I got up slowly, took one last look at the kitchen, and began walking toward the front hallway. I didn't know where I was going, just that I couldn't stay in the kitchen anymore. As I passed the living room, I caught a snippet of conversation. Zoraida's voice. Sweet, sharp. I've finally made this house feel like mine. She laughed. The guest laughed with her. And I stood there, just on the other side of the wall, every part of me going still. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't slam a door or shatter a plate. I just stood there in the hallway, gripping the edge of the wooden chair I'd once polished with lemon oil and vinegar, like somehow the grain beneath my palm could anchor me. It didn't. Instead, I walked out the front door, past the strangers still sipping from wine glasses in my grandmother's garden, and got in my car without a single word. I drove without a destination, just miles of silence and rising heat pressing against the windshield. 3 days later, I was standing in line at the county clerk's office. I'd meant to file a change for a minor utility account still listed under Grandma Eulalia's name. Nothing legal, just routine. The office was quiet except for the hum of old fans and the sound of someone tapping a pen against a clipboard nearby. The woman behind the counter, glasses slipping down her nose, took my papers and typed something into her computer. She paused, frowned, typed again, then looked up at me. Are you, Leah? I nodded, unease rising. She said, her voice dropping just slightly. It looks like this property's already been transferred. It's under new ownership. I blinked. That can't be right. There must be a mistake. She turned her monitor toward me. There it was, in black and white. A property transfer dated last month. From Orville Hartwell to a limited liability company. My stomach dropped. Do you know who bought it? I asked. She hesitated again. I shouldn't be giving out too much, but it's an investment firm based in Atlanta. Looks like a holding group, nothing personal listed. All paperwork went through your father's name. The room spun for a moment. I thanked her, though I don't remember how, and walked outside into the blinding Georgia heat. I stood on the sidewalk, phone still in my hand, unsure of what to do next. Grandma's voice floated up in my memory, not loud, not forced, just gentle, like always. This house is your anchor, Leah. No matter what happens out there, you'll always have a place to come home to. But now, that place had a deed, and it didn't have my name on it. I unlocked my car and sat behind the wheel, too stunned to drive. That's when my phone buzzed, a voicemail from my father. I pressed play. Leah, look, let's not make this into something it's not. Things change. People move on. Just try to be reasonable about this, okay? Reasonable. I stared at the dashboard for a long time before finally turning the key in the ignition. I needed to see it for myself. The house looked unchanged from the front, same porch swing, same shutters, but I didn't go through the main door. I parked around back and entered through the side, just like I had 100 times before. I walked slowly through the hallway, the wooden floors creaking beneath my feet, and then I stopped. The back hallway, that wall. My grandmother had carved something into it years ago, just a small inscription, shallow but legible, right beneath the hallway sconce. For Leah, who keeps the fire. It was gone. The wall had been painted over in a dull, impersonal white, the kind that looked clean but said nothing. I reached out and ran my fingers along the spot. If I squinted, I could still make out the faintest trace of the carving, like a whisper trying to survive through silence. I stood there for a while. Just stood. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe a letter in the mail. Maybe a family meeting. Maybe something that felt less like being erased. Later that evening, I found Dad on the porch. He was reading the paper, legs crossed like he had no idea the ground under my feet had shifted forever. I sat beside him without saying a word. After a long pause, I asked, "When did you decide to sell?" He didn't look up from the paper.
It's not about decisions, Leah. She never filed anything formal. It was still in my name. You can't live off memories. My throat tightened. She told me it was mine. She promised. He folded the newspaper slowly, like we were discussing the weather. And I'm telling you, he said, eyes finally meeting mine. This was the practical thing to do. There was nothing else to say. I left before sunset. Drove back to the tiny one-bedroom rental I'd been staying in on the edge of town. I sat at the kitchen table, still wearing the same blouse from earlier, now wrinkled with hours of tension. I opened my laptop to answer some emails, anything to take my mind off the weight on my chest. That's when I saw it. An unread message with no subject. No sender I recognized. I clicked. Inside was a single attachment. Eulalia will scan 2018.pdf. I didn't recognize the email address. No subject line. Just a single PDF attachment with a name that stopped my breath. Eulalia will scan 2018.pdf. For a moment, I just stared at it, the cursor hovering above the file like a plane circling a storm. My hand trembled slightly as I clicked. It opened with a soft chime. I scanned the page, taking in every detail. Grandma's looping cursive at the bottom, the date, the notary seal, Mina's signature as witness. It was real. Everything she told me. It was real. The document clearly stated that the property, her house, my house, was to be left to me. No conditions, no hidden clauses, just a straightforward, heartfelt declaration of trust. I printed it. 2 copies. Put one in my purse and the other in a drawer under my tax forms. Then I drove. The late morning sun was already high, glaring through my windshield, casting long shadows against the familiar roads I used to take home from school. 20 minutes later, I was back at the house. Not my house legally, yet, but mine in every memory, every creaking floorboard. I found Dad in the backyard. He was trimming the hedges, wearing the same sun-bleached baseball cap he always had. His movements were steady, practiced, like this was just another Tuesday. "Dad!" I called, my voice level. He turned, the shears stopping mid-air. "Leah!" I walked toward him, the paper folded neatly in my hand. I offered it without a word. He took it, glanced briefly, then scoffed. "That's not filed," he said flatly. "Doesn't hold up in court. You're not a lawyer, Leah. You're just the girl who changed her diapers at the end." The words hit harder than I expected, not because they surprised me, but because he said them like they meant nothing. He handed the paper back, uninterested, and turned to pick up his coffee mug from the patio table, the one Grandma always used for her afternoon brew. Without warning, he knocked it off the edge. It shattered across the stones. He didn't flinch, just kept walking toward the side of the yard. I crouched down, collecting the ceramic shards with bare hands. The sharp edges dug into my palms, but I barely noticed. That cup had been part of a ritual, a daily moment of warmth and steadiness, and now it was just pieces on the ground, like everything else. I sat there for a while, surrounded by silence and broken porcelain, feeling like a kid again, but this time, there was no one left to tell me it would be okay. From somewhere behind me, I heard ice clinking in a glass. "You're still here," Zoraida said lightly. I stood, brushing dust from my jeans. She was on the porch, one hand resting on her hip, the other holding a wine glass at noon like it was nothing. "I saw you with the papers," she added, taking a sip. "Let's be honest, Leah. Even if you got this place back, who would you leave it to? A cat?" Her tone was casual, cutting. I didn't answer. I could feel my jaw tightening, the words building up in my throat, desperate to be let out. But I swallowed them whole, because she wanted that. She wanted the outburst. Instead, I turned around and walked back to my car, gripping the steering wheel with both hands before starting the engine. I didn't head home. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to breathe. Eventually, I ended up in the parking lot of the old church on Cedar Street. The lot was mostly empty. Just me and the silence. I parked and sat there, eyes on the steering wheel, letting the air conditioning hum around me. What was I really? A daughter no one listened to, a caretaker who got erased.
A woman standing alone in a storm that her own family built. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I almost ignored it, but something told me to check. A text from an unknown number. Just one sentence. Minna wants to see you. She remembers everything. The sun had barely crested over the tree line by the time I found myself pulling into the lot at Brookhaven Retirement Home. I hadn't packed anything, hadn't even showered, just brushed my hair, threw on a clean blouse, and got in the car. My eyes were puffy, but dry. There was no more space left for tears. I parked under a blooming magnolia and turned off the engine, letting the air conditioning run a few seconds longer before cutting it. The lot was quiet. There were no nurses milling about, no visitors laughing over early morning coffee. Just me and the building. Brookhaven looked exactly like I remembered from years ago when Grandma used to come visit her old bridge partner. The siding had yellowed. One of the shutters leaned slightly to the left, but the garden beds out front were freshly mulched, and someone had taken time to trim the roses. Inside, the front desk nurse greeted me politely and asked who I was here to see. I gave her Minna's full name. She smiled, genuinely, and buzzed me in. Mina's room was on the second floor, west wing. I took the stairs slowly, clutching the railing, unsure whether it was from nerves or simple fatigue. When I knocked, there was a pause. Then a familiar voice, soft and weathered, called out, "It's open, sweetheart." I stepped inside. Minna was in her chair near the window, a knitted blanket across her lap and a photo album open beside her. Her face lit up the second she saw me. "Well, if it isn't the firekeeper herself," she said, smiling in that way that made something inside me steady for the first time in weeks. I sat beside her, and for a few seconds, we just looked at each other. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to look at me and see me, not as a burden or an afterthought or someone standing in the way, but as someone who mattered. "I got a message," I said softly, "saying you remembered everything." Mina gave a slow, satisfied nod. "I remember everything, honey. I remember the day your grandma signed the will. I remember the pen skipped a little when she wrote your name because she was tearing up. I remember because I was sitting right there at that kitchen table." My breath caught in my throat. "I thought maybe I was crazy," I whispered. "They said there was no will. They told me I imagined it all." Mina reached over and squeezed my hand. "That's what people do when they want power they didn't earn. They rewrite truth and call it paperwork." She turned to the photo album beside her and flipped open a secret flap in the back cover. Tucked beneath the cardboard was a small USB drive. "I made a copy," she said. "Just in case they tried to erase you." I took it with trembling fingers, pressing it against my palm like it was the most precious thing I'd ever held. "It has everything," she continued. "The signed will, scanned clear as day. Me as witness, dated, stamped. She even wrote you a note at the bottom, something about keeping the house warm for people who need it." I felt the sting of tears, but I refused to let them fall. Not there, not yet. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. Mina didn't flinch. She looked at me the same way Grandma had when I was a kid, firm but kind. "Because I was waiting for you to stop surviving and start fighting. I knew you would. You're Eulalia's granddaughter." That was the moment I knew. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. And I damn sure wasn't going to stay quiet. I left Brookhaven an hour later, a different woman than the one who had walked in. The sky was brighter. My spine was straighter. Back at my apartment, I climbed the narrow stairs 2 at a time, opened my laptop, and plugged in the USB. Every document was there. I copied them to 2 separate cloud drives and printed 3 hard copies. I slid one into a folder labeled Legal, another into my purse, and the third I tacked to my fridge with a magnet shaped like Georgia. The next morning, a courier envelope was waiting at my door. No return address. Inside was a thick packet of legal documents, a settlement offer. $25,000. If I agreed to waive all rights to the house, if I stayed quiet. Deadline, 72 hours. My father had signed it. His handwriting was clinical. No note, no apology. I stood at the kitchen counter, rereading it, my stomach tightening. I called my brother, Darvin. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice groggy. Leah? I need to ask you something, I said, skipping pleasantries. Did you know about this? The offer? There was a pause. Yeah, he admitted. Dad told me last week. And you didn't say anything? Another pause. I didn't want to get in the middle. You are in the middle, I snapped. We all are. Look, Leah, we all got a little something. Don't burn everything to the ground over one house. It's not worth it. I didn't say goodbye. I hung up and tossed my phone onto the bed. It was worth everything. That night, I sat with every document spread across the floor of my apartment. I scanned, printed, backed up again. I wrote out a timeline. I labeled folders. I numbered evidence. They wanted quiet. They wanted shame. They'd get something else. I picked up the phone and called Felix Harmon, an old friend from college who'd gone into family law. He answered with his usual dry wit. Leah Hartwell. Now there's a name I haven't heard in a while. What kind of mess are you in? I need to open a case for property fraud, I said. I have proof. He didn't ask for an explanation, just told me to come by with everything I had. That was Felix, cut straight to the bone, no fluff, no filler. It was one of the things I always appreciated about him, especially now. The next morning, I drove to his office, a modest two-story building tucked behind a dental clinic and a dry cleaner. Felix didn't do big-time corporate law. He'd built a reputation on messy estates, small business battles, and the kind of family drama nobody wanted to admit made up half the county court's calendar. His receptionist offered me coffee. I declined. My stomach wasn't going to accept anything right now, not even air. I handed him the folder. He spread the documents out across his desk, brow furrowing deeper with every page. The printed will, Mina's statement, the scanned file from the anonymous email, screenshots of text messages, voicemail transcripts, my own summary timeline. When he looked up, his voice was calm but laced with an undercurrent I hadn't heard since college finals week. You've got more than enough for a case. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is deliberate. This is fraud. I nodded, but I didn't smile. He leaned back, folding his hands. Once we file this, there's no going back. They're not going to welcome you to Thanksgiving dinner after this. They lost me, I said, the day they sold her house behind my back. Felix nodded once, then started typing. By noon, the complaint was drafted. I read every word before signing, twice. When it was done, I sat in my car outside his office and let the weight settle in my chest. I didn't feel better. I felt clear. Later that afternoon, I drove to the old house. I knew it was a risk. But there were still a few things of mine in the attic. Photo albums, Grandma's baking tins, an old cedar box with my name carved in the lid. I wanted them. I needed them. Zoraida answered the door before I even knocked. She must have seen me pull up from the window. She stood there in her house slippers, lips pressed thin. You need to leave, she said, arms crossed. I just want my things from the attic, I said evenly. I won't touch anything else. Orville appeared behind her, moving slower than usual, rubbing his shoulder like he'd just come in from yard work. You were told not to come back here, he said. You're not welcome on this property. This was my home, I replied. I grew up in this house. That was then, he snapped. Now it's not your business. I have a legal right. He cut me off. We'll let the police sort it out. And that was that. Minutes later, 2 officers arrived. One looked barely old enough to drink. The other had a gut that told me he hadn't run in years. I handed them my ID, pointing to the address on it. This address. The older officer scratched his head. You lived here recently? For years, I said, until they forced me out after my grandmother passed. Do you have anything in writing showing ownership? I swallowed. Not here, but I have a legal case pending. The younger cop looked between me and Orville, who was standing smugly on the porch now, Zoraida behind him, pretending not to gloat. We can't mediate civil claims, the older one said, not unkindly. You'll have to go through the courts. Right now, they're listed as property owners. I nodded. I understand.
I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. I turned back to my car, carrying only a plastic storage bin I'd kept in the back seat and my grandmother's Bible, which I always brought with me in moments like this, not because I was overly religious, but because it reminded me who I came from. As I walked down the driveway, I caught the eye of Mrs. Callahan from across the street. She stood behind her screen door, hand on her walker, watching everything. She didn't say a word, but when our eyes met, she gave me a slow, deliberate nod. That night, I wrote a letter. I didn't address it to anyone. I didn't sign it with anger or hope, just facts, a copy of the will, the scan, and one handwritten note Grandma had tucked into my birthday card a year before she passed. The house is yours. You earned it tenfold. I folded the pages neatly, placed them in a certified envelope, and drove back to the house. The porch light was off. I slid the envelope into the mailbox without hesitation. No note, no threat, just the truth. The next morning, I logged onto my social media and posted a single sentence. Sometimes, silence isn't peace, it's complicity. I've been quiet long enough. I didn't tag anyone, didn't name names, but I didn't have to. The comments poured in. Old neighbors, former classmates, even a few of Grandma's church friends. Some were cautious, some sympathetic, others quietly outraged. A few people sent direct messages offering support. I didn't respond. I just needed them to know I wasn't hiding anymore. Around 5 that evening, as the light began to fade and the cicadas started their nightly chorus, an email pinged into my inbox. From the county court. Subject, petition status. I clicked. Your petition has been accepted. A court date is scheduled. I exhaled slowly, folded the letter, and said to myself, it begins now. Then I pulled the yellow legal pad toward me, the one with dog-eared corners and ink stains from years ago when Grandma taught me to balance her checkbook. Oh, funny how war often starts with paper. Over the next 2 hours, I built a binder thicker than my senior thesis. Every document, emails, printed texts, notarized scans, statements, photos of the house before Zoraida painted over everything, went in its own tab. Each page was labeled, cross-referenced, and backed up twice online. Felix called around dinner time, asked how ready I was. You don't need to memorize the whole thing, he said. Just speak to what's true. Practice saying, this wasn't just property, it was legacy. Let that be your anchor. I repeated the sentence out loud several times that evening until it didn't tremble in my throat anymore. The next morning, while reorganizing an old box of family photos I'd nearly tossed, I found a picture of Grandma and me sitting on the porch swing. I must have been 8. She had her arm wrapped around me, her eyes squinting against the sun, and I was laughing so hard my teeth showed crooked in the corners. On the back, in fading ink, she'd written, "You're the firekeeper, Leah. They'll try to snuff you out. Don't let them." I slipped the photo into a cheap gold frame and set it beside my testimony notes. The town started whispering before I said anything publicly. That was the thing about places like ours. Once a story starts moving, it travels faster than wind. It began with an anonymous post in a local Facebook group. She lived there, took care of the old woman. They sold the house behind her back. I didn't comment, I didn't share it, but I saved a screenshot, just in case. Zoraida jumped in, of course. She always did. Posted a polished, passive-aggressive response. There's a lot more to the story than folks assume. We did what was best for everyone involved. Change isn't always easy, but it's necessary. That was all it took. The thread exploded. Some people defended her. Others asked questions. A few made cutting remarks about her renovations. I stayed quiet. But every word they wrote, I filed away like a puzzle piece.
A week later, the local newspaper did a short lifestyle feature on home transformations around Savannah. It was the kind of fluffy content they used to bury between political op-eds and bake sale announcements. There she was, Zoraida, smiling in front of the porch like she owned the world. The caption read, "This dusty old house needed life. We gave it a soul again." I stared at the article longer than I meant to. The gall, the calculated erasure. I could feel my jaw tighten, my shoulders stiffen, but I didn't let myself react. I just closed the browser and whispered, "Let her keep talking. The more she says, the worse she'll sound in court." I began walking the neighborhood again in the afternoons, not to talk, not to cause a scene, just to be seen. I waved at neighbors, stopped for polite hellos, petted a few dogs I recognized from childhood. The air felt different in that part of town, heavier maybe, but I made sure my presence lingered like incense after church. I saw Orville once. He was sitting on the porch, back straight, staring into nothing. When he spotted me, his jaw tensed. He didn't speak, just watched. Zoraida pulled the curtain shut not long after. That night, just as I was organizing the next batch of paperwork for court submission, my phone rang. It was Felix. I hadn't spoken to him since the last round of paperwork was submitted. "You sitting down?" he asked. No preamble. I sat. "Tell me." "We just got confirmation. They're filing a countersuit." I paused, gripping the armrest. "On what grounds?" "Emotional harassment," he said. "They're claiming your public comments and presence in the neighborhood are causing them distress." I let the silence stretch long enough to hear my own pulse. "Leah?" "I'm here," I said calmly. "Let them try. I've got truth. They've got theatrics." He chuckled. "That's the attitude." "I'll start drafting our response." I ended the call and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, thinking not of the countersuit, not even of the courtroom, but of Grandma's note on the back of that photo. "They'll try to snuff you out. Don't let them," I whispered back. "Not a chance." I didn't even flinch. "Good," I said. "Let's show them what emotional abuse really looks like." Felix chuckled low into the phone. That's the fire I wanted to hear. By the time the court date arrived, the morning air was sharp with the kind of chill Savannah rarely held onto past sunrise. I wore Grandma's old brooch, a small silver leaf with a chip near the edge, pinned to the lapel of my navy blazer. It wasn't luck. I didn't believe in that anymore. But it reminded me who I was walking in for. The courthouse smelled like coffee and old floors. I found Felix already inside, his tie loose around his collar, flipping through our binder one last time. His legal pad was marked in 3 colors, with yellow sticky tabs blooming from every edge. "You ready?" he asked, not looking up. "As I'll ever be." We didn't speak again until we were called in. Inside, the room was bigger than I expected, but it still felt small, especially with Zoraida seated across the aisle, perfectly composed in her cream-colored suit, and Orville beside her, avoiding eye contact like it cost him something. Their lawyer, a man in an expensive gray suit with perfectly trimmed facial hair, stood with an air of confidence that made me want to throw my grandmother's brooch at him. He opened strong, too strong, claimed I was emotional, unstable, and unfit to handle any estate matters. He used the phrase resentful caretaker more than once. I didn't react. I just watched him. He made the mistake of treating me like I was fragile. That was his first error. When it was our turn, Felix stood slow, deliberate. "We're not here to argue emotions," he said, walking toward the judge. "We're here to look at facts. A legally signed, witnessed will, multiple forms of corroborating documentation, and witnesses who watched this young woman care for her grandmother until the day she passed, while the so-called plaintiffs never lifted a finger." He handed the judge the folder. When the judge opened it and began reading aloud the line, "To my granddaughter Leah, sole heir of the 160-year-old estate located on South Whitaker Street." The entire room shifted. Zoraida's shoulders straightened, but she didn't speak. Orville stared at the table like the wood grain had the answers. Felix didn't stop there. He called Mina first. She walked slowly to the stand, holding a cane in one hand and her church purse in the other. When she raised her right hand to swear in, her voice didn't shake. She told the court exactly what she'd told me, that she was there the day the will was signed, that she read it herself, and that my grandmother's only concern was that I'd be too soft-hearted to fight if anything ever went wrong. Next came the neighbors. One by one, they affirmed the same truth. I'd lived there, cared for the house and my grandmother,
They'd never seen Zoraida until after Eulalia's funeral. It was clear, crystal. And then came the twist neither side saw coming. Felix handed over a new document, an inspection report dated just weeks after the sale to the LLC. It revealed that Zoraida had listed the house as vacant, previously abandoned, in disrepair. The same house I had lived in, maintained, loved. The judge raised an eyebrow. Abandoned? Zoraida looked to her lawyer, who gently placed a hand on her arm, silently signaling her not to speak. She opened her mouth anyway. "Well, it needed life," she said. "It was falling apart." Felix smiled, just a hint. "And yet you claimed full renovation credit in the Savannah Post article dated last month." He dropped the printout on the bench like it was a gavel. The judge skimmed it, glanced toward Zoraida again, and said simply, "This will require deeper review." Then came the part that made my skin tighten. The judge paused, looked around. "I'm granting a temporary injunction on the transfer of the deed. No further renovations, sales, or filings are to be made on the property until we complete review of potential fraudulent activity in the sale." Zoraida gasped audibly. Her lawyer whispered something sharp. Orville, on the other hand, slumped slightly. His eyes didn't rise. And then, softly, barely above a whisper, I heard him mutter toward her, "You never loved me. You only loved her money." Zoraida shot back without missing a beat. "I loved a man. You became her shadow." It was ugly, honest. And in front of a room full of people, it cut deeper than anything filed on paper. I didn't smile. I didn't revel in it. I just sat there, the brooch heavy on my collarbone, and waited. When the judge finally turned back to me, his voice was firm, measured. "Ms. Leah, we'll reconvene in 30 days for final determination, but it looks very promising." I nodded once. Then I stood and walked out, shoulders square, head high, not because I'd won, but because I hadn't let them bury me quietly. It should have felt like victory, but I walked out wondering why I still felt so heavy. Felix said something to the judge, shook hands with the clerk, but the sound faded around me. I clutched the folder containing the court ruling, holding it tight against my ribs as if it might vanish if I let go. Outside, the parking lot buzzed faintly with cicadas, the kind of late spring heat that wrapped around your neck like a scarf you never asked for. I stood beside my car for a moment, eyes closed, just breathing. We'd won. The judge formally acknowledged the will, declared it valid, binding. My name, in ink and memory, was restored as the rightful heir to my grandmother's home. The fraudulent sale was reversed, and the judge hinted, almost pointedly, that a criminal investigation into the transaction was a matter worth pursuing. But all I could think about was Grandma, how quiet her presence felt now, how loud her absence had become. Later that afternoon, Felix picked me up in his old Toyota and drove us straight to the house. I hadn't been inside since the police made me leave. The locksmith met us there. 30 minutes and 2 turns of a drill later, the front door clicked open. I stepped inside alone. The house smelled like lavender and lemon floor cleaner, a scent that used to comfort me. Now it just felt artificial, like someone had tried to wipe away the past with a bottle from aisle 7. In the dining room, one chair remained untouched, the one where my father always sat. I didn't cry. I didn't touch it. I just grabbed a clean cloth from the linen drawer, draped it over the backrest, and hung a small wooden sign on the chair. Some chairs stay empty forever. By dusk, Felix had left, and I stayed behind. No music, no lights. Just me and the dust motes dancing in the last slant of sunlight through the windows. Around 7:30, I heard footsteps on the gravel walkway. Orville stood just beyond the gate, both hands resting on the metal bars like a man peering into a zoo exhibit. He didn't call my name, just stood there, then finally said, "I did what I thought was fair. I didn't think you'd fight." I didn't open the gate. I didn't step closer. "You didn't think I remembered who I was," I replied. He didn't argue, just nodded once and turned away. His back looked smaller than I remembered. That night, I turned on one light, the lamp beside Grandma's reading chair, and walked slowly from room to room. I wasn't trying to restore the past. I wasn't chasing ghosts.
I was reclaiming what had been mine all along. I kept the paint Zoraida had used in the front room. The soft gray didn't bother me. It felt like a blank slate. But I brought back the floral curtains Grandma had sewn herself, still carefully folded in a storage tote. I rehung her spice rack in the kitchen, found her old cake pans in the garage, and washed them by hand. I didn't try to make the house exactly as it was. That version was gone. But I honored what mattered, and let go of what didn't. By the third day, I had almost settled into a rhythm, sanding, cleaning, patching nail holes, when I decided it was time to unpack the last box, the one with Grandma's quilts. Each one had a name embroidered in the corner. Morning Meadow, Carolina Fall, Eulalia's Garden. But the one I reached for had no title stitched in, just a simple line, for Leah. So she knows she always belonged here. I draped it over the sofa, sat back, breathed. I was halfway into a mug of peppermint tea when someone knocked at the door. The porch light cast a soft glow across the entryway as I opened it. Darvin stood there, shoulders slouched, a cardboard box cradled in his arms. He didn't smile, didn't pretend. "I didn't know what to do back then," he said quietly, "but I saved your things. Figured you'd come back for them one day." "I didn't know what to do back then," he said. "I didn't either. But now I do." We sat quietly in the front room, the box resting between us like a fragile truce. Inside were some of my old journals, a stack of letters Grandma had written to me over the years, and a pair of earrings I thought I'd lost when I moved out. Darvin didn't say much, just watched as I sifted through each item with careful hands. "I found the will in her sewing basket," he finally said, his voice low. "But Dad made it sound like it didn't matter. He said you wouldn't fight." I met his eyes. "And you believed him." He looked down, guilt flashing across his face. "I didn't want to be in the middle. I didn't want to be the one who chose sides." "You did, Darvin, whether you meant to or not." He didn't defend himself, just nodded slowly. I respected that. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "For bringing this. I mean it." He stood, the moment heavy between us. "Some people heal with time," I added. "Others need space. I'll take the latter." No hug, no dramatic farewell. Just understanding. He walked out the door, leaving the box behind. The next day, I rose early, tied back my hair, and dug into the earth at the front of the house. The dirt was soft from last night's rain, and it crumbled easily around my fingers. I planted the rose bush where Grandma had always wanted it, right beneath the bay window where she used to sit with her crossword puzzles and tea. By mid-morning, I had unpacked the last of her quilts. I chose the softest one, the one she always kept folded at the foot of her bed, and draped it across the back of the living room couch. The pattern was simple, faded now, but the stitches were still strong. That afternoon, I walked down the hall barefoot, listening to the wood creak under each step. The quiet was different now. It wasn't empty, it was whole. Later that week, an envelope arrived. No return address. I didn't need one. Inside, a single sentence in my father's handwriting. "You won. I hope you're proud." No greeting, no apology. Just that. I folded the paper and placed it in the drawer I'd labeled unanswered things. It sat beneath a stack of old photographs, tucked away but not forgotten. I never wrote back. And yet, I wasn't angry. Some truths didn't need confrontation, some wounds didn't need picking. They just needed to be acknowledged, quietly, and left in the past where they belonged. The following Sunday, I opened the front door to the first group of women who'd come to see the space. It wasn't official, just a few people from the community who needed a place to sit, to read, to be. I didn't advertise. I didn't hang a banner. I just left the door open. They came in pairs, in silence, in curiosity. Some brought tea. Others brought stories. A few simply sat in the old chairs and cried softly without saying a word. This house, once a place where I had been cast out, now welcomed others without question. As the last woman left that afternoon, she paused in the doorway. "It feels like a real home," she said, "not just a house." I smiled and nodded. "That's what it was always meant to be."
That night, I walked through the kitchen, brushed my fingers across the counter where Grandma used to cool her pies, and stood in the hallway where her words had once been carved. For Leah, who keeps the fire. Paint couldn't cover that kind of memory. Time couldn't wash it away. She didn't leave me money. She left me truth. And that was enough. I turned off the lights one by one, walked to the front door, and stood there for a long moment. I didn't get to keep my father, but I kept my name, and that was everything. Sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who betray us the deepest. Leah's story is a reminder that silence doesn't mean surrender, and that reclaiming your voice can be the most powerful form of justice. What about you? Have you ever been forced to stand up to your own family? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that cut deep and speak truth.